So we're trying to do a kind of annual series focused on safety talk. So this year it's more focused, it's more based around some of the incidents that have happened during the year and discussions I've had during debrief. So it's not, some of the previous ones have been a bit more kind of numbers oriented. This one's a bit more airy-fairy, so I hope it goes all right. But the background, so this last year we had 10 serious incidents, fatalities or hospitalisations.
Is that in Canterbury?
That's Canterbury figures, yeah. So it's not great. That's 1 in 30. We've got 270 pilots registered, so it's 1 in 30. And given that average hours about 20, between 20 and 25, there's a lot of not very active pilots in there. So I'm guessing say half of us are reasonably active. So we're looking at 1 in 15 active pilots. So about half of those are speedwing accidents. So the speedwing statistics are just really bad. But even paragliding, 1 in 30 active pilots, it's not great, and it's pretty clear that what we're doing is not working. And that's annual. Like if you think about that happening every year, your chances of getting through a 20 or 30 year career as a paraglider pilot starts to look not that great. So basically, I just wanted to focus on two things. One is this kind of navigating your brain. It's pretty obvious talking to people who had not even like definitely the serious accidents, but even some other incidents. People were really surprised at themselves in terms of what they'd done. Like they did things that they would not have expected themselves to do, that they knew were wrong, but happened anyway. So I wanted to talk about some of the things that go on that make that happen, and some talk about structuring margins. So I was doing a debrief with the pilot, and I mentioned the margins, and they asked me how I think about that. So that's kind of like a personal perspective about how I approach these things. I've only been flying for 8 years, but I have a long history of mountaineering and sailing. So I've dealt with risk-based activities over a very long period. So more on navigating the fallible brain. So I know in a couple of the previous talks I've talked a bit about heuristics, about these kind of traps that exist that make us make mistakes. So the classic one for paragliding pilots is the survivor bias, where you see your mates doing something, or you see somebody else doing something, and it works all right, and so you think that's the right thing to do, but you can't actually tell whether that's because they've been lucky or because it is actually a safe practice. And that's real, because we're small numbers here, it's really hard for us to judge whether what we're seeing is and what we're experiencing is actually safe, or whether it's just that we've been lucky at that time. But this talk's a bit more kind of a bit kind of more broader based, and it's about some of the things that go on both externally and in our brain, and why that all leads us to stuff it up, basically. So just a couple about the internal and external, and then some internal stuff. So cultural, when I'm talking about culture, I'm talking about the society we live in and the kind of influences that exist on us. So it's not the people that you're directly in contact with, but the wider society, the media, people you see talking, all that kind of stuff. And I think the key cultural themes for us is risk taking as a mainstream activity now. used to be that it was definitely a fringe activity, that was kind of the rebels and the outsiders that did it, but now it's very mainstream, it's highly commercialised. This whole Red Bull phenomenon where this big company's paying young athletes to take bigger and bigger risks, and their livelihood becomes dependent on becoming bigger and bigger risks and and getting a bigger and bigger following. Man, it's a hell of a phenomenon, eh? The achievement, this concept of achievement and success, is very embedded in our society. I'm not knocking it up. I like setting myself objectives and achieving them. But it's actually a cultural phenomenon. Not all societies have that. It's very much a feature of probably, very more individualistic Western capitalist societies. And I think the thing that we miss in all of that, there's two things we miss. One is that those are all really arbitrary. When we're setting ourselves objectives in paragliding, they're completely arbitrary. They have no particular meaning. And beyond survival, all of it's a bit irrelevant. But it's really hard. It's hard to keep that perspective on it. The saying I really like is that the slopes of Everest are littered with highly achievement and success-oriented people. And then our real world is an extension of the online world. The camera. It's not just the camera actually. Many of us, and certainly I, probably spend more time online, excluding my sleeping. I spend more time online than I do anything else. I work the screen. I scroll incessantly when I get home and want to relax. But the games, all the media we consume, this line between what's real and what's online has become really blurred, and so it's hard when you combine it with that risk-taking thing in particular. It becomes hard to tell what's hard to remember that actually the ground is really hard. That there are real world consequences for the things that we do. And then there's your social context that we live in. Like this whole thing about the heroic individual that's it's kind of very much embedded in our culture as just a complete myth. We're all part of these really complex, multi-layered social groupings, and when you take it out of them, you become a really different person than the one that you are in them. I don't know if any of you have ever gone and lived in a completely different society. I know when I was living in France and was speaking French all the time, I found my personality being actually quite different than I was in New Zealand. But your family, your friends, your work colleagues, the fellow pilots, the group that we've got here, they're all kind of quite detailed and influential context to the way that your brain interprets and understands and responds to the world. It provides norms. So our group provides norms about what's an okay thing to do when you're flying. Provides definitions of success. So going to Akaroa or doing getting to Springfield from Bradley Burns there. The kind of definitions of success that we've kind of collectively developed. The concepts of status and acceptance. We as humans are intensely social animals. Like it's the key to our success as a people, as a species. It's our ability to work together and work as a group. And so, having status and being accepted in your group is an incredibly powerful thing for us. I feel incredibly influential on our thinking and decision making. So even if regardless of whether you accept or reject your social context, it's still going to be impacting on you. It's still going to be impacting on your decision making, and it can definitely both promote and inhibit your safety orientation. You both give and receive social context, so the way that you talk about things and react to people is equally influential on them as they are on you. You can't you can't really influence your social context other than kind of leaving and going somewhere else. You can influence them in the way that you talk and deal with things, but the most important thing is to be aware of what your social context is and how it's influencing what your brain is doing, what it's thinking, and how it's reacting to the world. So this is coming into the kind of more internal factors. So this is how your brain reacts and works in relation to the world. And so just a few concepts that I wanted to talk about here. Bandwidth is a really important one. It's really interesting. You think about your brain as being this kind of computer that just steps through things, but it's actually got a really narrow bandwidth to deal with things. And there's a lot of, I'm an economist in my professional life, and there's a lot of research in that area about how stress on your bandwidth affects your decision making. And there's a lot of evidence now to show that it does lead to, economic context, I'm sure, and every context, it leads to shorter term and more impulsive decisions. There's a really good study in India. These farmers who have 2 crops a year, so they have 2 year to year when they have quite a lot of money, and then they experience stress in between, so it's a subsistence living basically. And they tested their IQ through over a number of years, and it basically follows the pattern of their money availability. So your IQ, your ability to understand and decide things, as a consequence of how much money you've got, rather than your money being a result of how much what your IQ is. And in our context, that becomes really important, that when your bandwidth becomes overloaded, your decision-making capacity goes down and gets so much worse. And that's definitely been really apparent in some of the accidents that we've had this year. That people, not just low airtime pilots, but people in new situations and under some stress have made decisions that they probably wouldn't have made in other circumstances. So the key-ish thing there is just be really wary of things taking up your bandwidth. And that's particularly, it's inside flying. I'll kind of talk about that in a bit. But you have outside influences that will also take up your bandwidth and drive you to make some decisions that you probably didn't want to make.
Simon?
Yeah?
I just read a book called Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah.
Basically, the fast is your intuition and the least amount of energy your brain requires, and that's what I'll always go to first. Thinking slow is you actually have to go through the possibilities.
Yeah,
the brain is not tuned to do the second. The magnetic.
That's oh no, we are connected. Yeah, that's a couple of economists kind of university. Yeah, that's
Nobel Prize.
So those guys do a lot of work on the heuristic stuff. So this, I'm just going to show you this video.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at the
Start strong, start smart with UOA Online.
Right. Right, that's not bad. So, the point about that video is this one about focus, that it's really difficult for us to see what's going on when we're focused. So the pilot that flew into the Sea at Taylor's that day, that person was just incredibly focused on getting up. They had this idea in their head that they were going to get to the cliffs and get up, and that's all they could see. And I know a number of you were watching that happen, and you were like, well, what's going on? And this is basically what was happening. Their focus just narrowed right down onto this one thing, and they could not comprehend anything outside of that. And you might say, oh yeah, but I mean, I knew about the gorilla, and I did not see the person leaving or the curtains changing colour in that experiment. And if those had been critical features of your flying day, that could have been you too. So the point I'm making here is that, you know, if we're focused or if we're distracted by things, you can't rely on your brain at all. And you know, many of us probably have quite strong obsessive tendencies, which is why we're paragliding. And so it's going to be a major trap for any of us. The sense of self. I originally had this as ego, but I think that's kind of a bit negative. Like, we all have this sense of who we are. We have a kind of sense of self-image. And that self-image is intimately related to that kind of those concepts of status and acceptance in our social context. And the evidence is that our beliefs about ourselves are very enduring. Like it'll continue regardless of any evidence to the contrary. And so you have to be really careful about your self-image, you know, and thinking about how you think about yourself in relation to your flying and in relation to other people, and be aware that that's a major trap for your decision making in the context of kind of trying to avoid risks, particularly when other people are doing things that you don't think are necessarily what you should be doing.
So how does that play out? If you've got an image of yourself as being a good pilot, do you think you can't make a mistake? Or?
Yeah. And even, you know, like you're bombing out and everybody else is staying up, and you think, well, why is, you know, like I'm as good a pilot as him, why is that happening to me? And that can, you know, like what we see, and again there's an accident that happened this year, is that drives you to do things that you would not otherwise do. Fly close to the hill, turn a circle when maybe you shouldn't. They're real, all these things that I've outlined here, they're real traps for the brain. And I think the point that I want to make is that you're not going to escape your cultural or social context, right? That's there, that's a given, that's what we live with. and you're not going to escape the limitations of your brain. I was talking to a psychologist friend of mine a couple of weeks ago about this talk and about what you can do about it, and she was really good. She said, you know, there's no way that you can hope to do this right. Like, there's no way that you can fix any of these problems. They're just kind of hardwired. They're a feature of who we are. All you can do is hope to navigate it. You've got to figure out ways to navigate through this jumble of stuff that's going on in your brain. And so the exercise that we have as pilots is to be aware of these things and to figure out ways to navigate through all these traps that are going on. To me, that's the kind of central task for us as pilots, because ultimately survival is the main game in town. Right? The rest of it's all just window dressing. Survival is the main thing that we want to do, and therefore this is our main task. Look, I don't have the answer to this. I'm just going to put up a few things that I think are useful and you know, I've used. Like, just be careful of the glamour of risk and the gladiator contest thing. You know, it's so easy to get into, particularly. You know, like you look at these people in paragliding who are doing amazing things. You know, he's doing these big long vault dives, and the speed ring pilots are freaking doing these mad things in canyons and stuff. And it looks fantastic, but there's no end to that. Like, there's always someone who's willing to go that bit further. There's no limitation in a gladiator contest, because if you get focused on winning that game, you just take on more and more risk. So be really careful of that. Keep perspective. Success is arbitrary. Achievement is arbitrary. 30 Ks, just a number. What is it, like 32.7 miles or something, or I don't know how many thousand feet. It's just they're just random things that you're doing. I'm not saying don't set them, as I say, I like doing it, but just keep your perspective about it. It's not more important than that main aim, that main game that we've got in town. Keep your decision-making margin. So I'm going to talk about that in a bit. It kind of relates to that issue of bandwidth and focus. Set limits. So this is probably the main thing that we need to do as pilots. Like, if you don't set limits, then you're just going off what everyone else is doing. You're accepting their risk tolerance, their knowledge, their expertise. If you don't set your own limits, then you're basically just being blown on the wind. So to me, that's the main thing you need to do. And then the second, the thing that's even harder than setting limits is working on ways to help you stick to that. Like the things that I do, I try and create useful, positive and negative emotional cues. So like, I find reading accident reports really useful for reminding myself that there are real consequences to this. You know, that things do go wrong, and you know, being in hospital recovering from a serious accident is really unpleasant. And you know, that's one of the better outcomes. Creating positive social context, I think it's really useful to you know, think about your friends, your family, your friends, and your community. Like, you know, this is a great group of people here. I really enjoy being around you and spending time with you. I know my family appear to love me. And you know, I've got a bunch of good friends, and it's really useful to carry them with you when you're flying, so that when you're making decisions, that you're not just thinking, oh, I've got to get over there, or I've got to get up. That there's also all these other people that are part of your life that are really important, that will be affected by the decisions that you make. Think about how you talk to others about your flying. And the one I also do regularly is I try and talk to people that I trust about my experiences to help process them and kind of gauge what's going on, because it's useful to get another perspective on the way that you're approaching things and the risks that you're taking. I also wanted to, because I know this is a thing that people have, as you get more experienced, you tend to think that you get better at this game. There's this channel, Seki Parapon, is a French channel, and they did an analysis. They do a number of these types of things. So they did an analysis of the fatality data from France between 2007 and 2023. So the average is about 2,000 pilots flying annually in France, 1,000 instructors. So the first question they asked, what's the average pilot look like? 40 years old roughly, mainly male, 5 years licensed, flying 50 hours a year. God, so much more than us. And only about 80% of them on B or A wings, right? And then if you look at the average fatality, a bit older, 10 years older, still all blokes, 10 years licensed, flying 84 hours a year, and about half of them on C wings or higher. So these are a much more experienced group of people than this. They're more experienced and they're more current, flying more hours. But it is not protective. It might be a little bit, their rate, I'll talk about that in a second, but they're obviously flying hotter wings and they're probably in more serious air, but their experience is not protective enough to enable them to cope with what they're in. And then they looked at instructors, so 1,000 instructors in France, a little bit, roughly the same, still blokes, 17 years licensed and flying 190 hours a year. And actually fewer of them on C wings and above, so more of them on probably B, you'd guess high Bs. But instructors die at 2.6 times the rate that you'd expect them to die if they were just dying the same way as everybody else. So they're actually more at risk than the average pilot. So it's a little bit misleading because if you look at it, well, it's not misleading, but if you look at it on an exposure rate, they're flying more than three times more than the average person. So probably on an hourly basis, they're evening out. But the fact remains that all that extra experience and all that extra currency is not enough to reduce their overall exposure, their overall rate of dying. And so that's a really important lesson for everyone to take on board. It doesn't matter how much you've learned since the kind of last time you thought about this, you're still going to be subject to the same traps and risks as the newest pilot. So I think the main lesson that I want us all to take from this. So I just want to emphasise, I'm not telling you what to do. I stuff it up all the time. It's just the message that I want us to take from this is that it's not just that you might get it wrong. You will get it wrong. We will make mistakes. There's just the evidence is overwhelming that we will do it and we will all do it. So the problem that we've got is obviously we're going to try and reduce that, but accepting that we're going to make mistakes, accepting that we're going to experience conditions that we didn't expect to experience, we need to think about margins, which is kind of the second part of this talk. Because margins are for the times when you do stuff it up, basically. So margins, I guess what I'm talking about there is that bit extra. So yes, it's the extra bit that you've got that you're not counting on for your everyday flying, right? So you're flying around, and I'm not counting on my wing being, trying not to count on my wing being, a low B and then I've got a few skills, and I've got a plan B. I'm trying to keep those things in reserve for when I stuff it up. So, just a list of some things I think you can do: decision-making margins, plan B, C and D, your landing field skills, wing, conditions, proximity to the ground, and your harness. So I was just going to talk about decision-making margins, landing skills, wing, and conditions. Proximity to the ground actually is probably one of the major things, but I've talked about it previously. Just it's the main determinant of whether you're going to have a serious accident. But I want to talk about these other things just this time. So decision-making margins. What I'm talking about here is trying to deal with that issue of bandwidth and focus. I've just done this little graphic here. Not my forte doing graphics, so this is our pilot up here, and it's trying to get to a ridge to get over the lee side, right? And no landing along here, only one landing over there. Reach a point of return. So if you wait until you get to that point of return before you make your decision on whether to turn around, you're in this really compressed space. You've got a lot of stress on you, your bandwidth narrows down, and it becomes a lot harder to make a good decision about whether you should keep going. So the decision-making margin I'm talking about is making it back here when you've got time. It's kind of relatively, obviously you're flying, so there's a bit of stress there, but you've got a relatively unstressed environment. And you're not actually deciding to turn around here, but you're making a rule up for when you are going to turn around. So you're saying, right, if I get there and I haven't got I haven't got a 6-to-1 glide to get over that ridge with 100 metres, then I'm going to turn around. And the trick is, and the one that I was kind of talking about before, is learning how to stick to that rule. So you've got the time there, you make that rule, and then you stick to it when you get to your point of no return. So you don't have to then work it all out in the moment. Okay. But the point I'd like to make is that you can do this before you take off. So you can make a bunch of decisions. You can preload your decisions so that you can decide, right, the day's doing this. When I start seeing cumes going more than whatever meters high, I know it's going to overdevelop, so I'm going to go and land. There's a bunch of these decisions that you can work through on the ground when you're even less stressed than you are in the air, and you've got even less kind of incentive to ignore all those other, that your family and your friends, and think about why you're taking these risks and all that kind of stuff. So, front loading it, and you can front load it even more, so you can do it when you're at home. I do a lot of this. I try and think through, what is it that I'm really trying to do here, and how am I going to set limits on the risks that I take when I'm flying, and I try and give myself as much margin by front-loading all my decisions as much as I can. And I think that's a good, it's not foolproof, and it's freaking hard to stick to things when you're in the air and all your mates are, going high. But it's better than making them in the moment. I try and practice them. I try and practice following things in non-stress situations. So if you go to Taylor's, I like to set myself limits there and stick to them, so that even if I know it gets to 20 k's, and even if I know I could actually take off and I'd still have a reasonable margin, I try and stick to that, because it gives you practice in dealing with the disappointment of other people flying when you're not, and of all those feelings that come with disappointing yourself and that kind of thing. I know it sounds weird, but actually it does work. Landing. this is just the easiest margin to add into your flying. Right? We get a lot of incidents. So this is the data from the 2024 accident report, the NZHGPA accident report. So accidents during landing, accidents on approach to landing, and accidents after landing. So you can see they stack it right out over here. They just overwhelm all the other incidents. So the biggest margin you can add into flying is to pick the largest landing field you can with the best conditions, approach it high and in front, and give yourself time to work out your landing and get in there. Just beyond everything else. Don't worry about where your car is. Don't worry about how far you have to walk. That big field is going to just makes a huge difference. Conditions, location, proximity. I'm putting this all under one box. I'm just calling it conditions, but obviously conditions are related to the location that you're flying. So we fly a lot stronger winds in tailors than we would in the mountains, and proximity to the ground. So we'll fly different conditions close to the ground than we would. So you wouldn't fly close to the ground in 5 meters a second, because it'd just be stupid. So those three go together, but I'm just kind of boxing them together as one conditions. So slight digression here. This is, as I mentioned, I've done a lot of sailing and I'm quite interested in the marine world, and I find this a really fascinating example. The Enchanter prosecution, which just got resolved recently. So, fishing charter vessel left the shelter of Three Kings with quite a strong weather prediction, so 40 knots and 4 to 6 metres sea. So the skipper reckoned it was about 2 to 3 metres. It's a big boat, so like 60 foot. So, and he'd been out in those conditions before, and he felt he could handle it. There's another skipper at the same time, in the same location, who decided conditions were too dangerous and didn't go. The skipper at the time thought he was heading back to Whangarei, I think, by Bay of Islands probably, and he headed over a shoal 10 metres depth. Waves really stand up, and they got overwhelmed by a 10 metre wave, and 5 people lost their lives. And the OSH took a prosecution against him. So he was found not guilty because it was deemed a rogue wave that had hit them. So the point that I want to make about this, which does relate to paragliding, so just bear with me. So these are the statistics for sea state. So if you're in a sea, 1.5 metre sea, which is kind of in a small boat, there's a bit going on, but in a big boat, you wouldn't really worry about it. So 1.5 metres, significant wave height, 2.4 metres, that's the top third of waves, sorry. A 1 in 1,000 waves is 2.8 metres, and 1 in 2,000 waves, so you'd expect that every 5 to 6 hours, is twice the average height, so a 3 metre wave. So 3 metre waves starting to get pretty big. That's probably as big as the roof here. It's probably that end of the roof. So a 3 metre wave breaking on you is a pretty significant event. And a rogue wave, which we don't actually know how often they occur, is up to 5 times the significant wave height. So you can be in a 1.5 metre sea and you can experience a 7.5 metre wave. This is in the open ocean. So the point about this is that the air is different but the same. So they're both fluid environments. We don't have data. I don't know how you measure data for that for the air. All we know is that there are pilots who've had incidents and hit the ground in conditions that they didn't consider out of the ordinary. And I don't know if you've ever watched those there's a number of videos up of comps where there's like hundreds of pilots flying along, and one of them will hit a patch of air and have a collapse, and like that. There's a few out there. That's I find that really fascinating. That there's all these pilots sampling the air, and there's one spot, just seemingly randomly, which has been bad enough to collapse that pilot's wing. Wave trains in the open ocean carry a long way, so you get these kind of wave trains overlapping and they stand up. So we don't get that in the air. The turbulence doesn't propagate as far, but we do fly close to terrain. I think the evidence from the sea is that waves, the probability of a wave is about 3 times higher as you're near terrain, you're near land. And we fly in the context of turbulence, we fly close to the ground pretty much all the time. And the other thing that we have that's different is we have this mix of wind and sort of this kind of horizontal and vertical component, which is just like built for creating turbulence. The way that I think we should be thinking about this is that there's a lot of things going on beyond what you can see and what you can experience. Like you can't rely on what you're experiencing now as a predictor of what is out there, basically. So gusts, typically in the open ocean, again, you get variation of up to 50% at lower wind speeds. Doesn't quite scale with as the wind speed goes up, but wind gusts are a lot higher, and we've had over the last couple of months actually we've had 3 incidents of people getting collapses or getting dragged in conditions that they thought they and their wing could cope with, and probably because of the fact that gusts are quite a bit greater, and they carry a lot more energy in them. And we need to be really careful about that increase in energy as things go up. So I guess the thing about conditions is that you need 2 kinds of margins for your conditions. You need a margin for when you get things wrong, so you put yourself in the wrong place. The one that, I don't know about you guys, but I almost inevitably, not every thermal, but I fall out at the back of thermals, and it's generally a fairly high energy place. And I don't think I'm ever going to be good enough to eliminate that happening occasionally. So we need a margin for when we get it wrong, and we need a margin for when these rogue waves come along. So we've got to build these into our flying. I'm going to kind of come back and try and bring these things together a bit. But wing, I don't want to dwell on this too long. People argue about this incessantly, but I think the evidence is that A wings are generally safer than CCC wings. They're just more forgiving. They're easy to take off, easy to land. They don't respond as strongly to inputs. And they recover from collapses probably more reliably. They're not safe. No wing is safe, but they are safer because they're more forgiving. And the other point I wanted to make, and Ross Ogden talks about this, is that you can't focus on the rating of it. It's actually probably the aspect ratio is a better predictor. So you can't say, I'm on a B wing, that's a reasonably safe wing, because a B wing at a 6.1 ratio is a completely different beast from the B wing at a 5.1 ratio. That it's a massive class. So never assume that just because you're in a particular category that it has this kind of reliable set of characteristics. And skills. I guess the thing I wanted to say here is this is a real trap for us in Canterbury in particular, is that you have in-flight and out-of-flight configuration. So we get quite good at our in-flight, when we're just flying along and staying up and going to places that we want to. but we get very little practice, other than when we accidentally get a collapse, of when things go out of normal flight configuration. So we tend to be a lot better at our normal in-flight configuration than the out-of-flight configuration, but it's actually the out-of-flight configuration that determines your safety. Like, it doesn't matter how good you are, if you can't respond to an auto-rotation, which I don't think I can, then you're not particularly safe in the air. SIV's, really good, but again, be realistic. If just because you've done something a year ago with someone on the radio in your ear doesn't mean that you're going to be able to do it when things happen in real life and it's a surprise and you're stressed and you're hopefully not too close to the ground. And I guess just practicing what you can, keeping your wing above your head and all those kinds of things. So, the reason I've kind of run through those is I just want to talk a bit about how they interact, because one of the things that I hear, in fact, I had this conversation with a pilot in strong, it was strong conditions, and I was saying to them, boy, it's pretty strong here, they're quite a new pilot. And they said to me, yeah, I'm on a B wing, so I should be all right. And you have to be really aware of the interactions between the different factors. So the B wing is only meaningful in the context of what your skills and what the conditions are. And similarly, your skills are only relevant in terms of your wing and your conditions. So if you've got really, really good skills, but you're on a CCC wing and in strong conditions, the evidence from competitions is that we regularly get accidents and people dying in those circumstances, even though they are the top pilots, or in theory the top pilots in the world. So it's really easy to over-rely on particular aspects of one of these and ignore the fact that you're actually still pushing it in the other aspects. I think of it as eating your margins, because you end up kind of repeatedly relying on one aspect that's strong when you're flying. So just kind of pulling this together, as I said, it's been quite a hard talk to put together, because a lot of the concepts are a little bit wishy-washy, so I hope it has some ideas that are useful. So this is actually based on Sunday's flight. This is my kind of target. So this is how I think about my flying and my margins and my safety. So my target range is kind of, actually it's 1 to 2, but I kind of think, well, up to 3 meters a second thermals I can probably cope with. 4 to 5. So at 2 to 3, I think, that's gone off the hand. This is skill margin. I think I've got some skills, like I can generally keep a wing open, talking about falling out the back. I've had a few collapses now. I can keep it flying straight, and I'm getting much better at keeping it open. But at 4 to 5 meters a second, I don't think, like the amount of energy. So 4 to 5 meters a second is about 20 to 25 kilometers an hour wind blowing straight up, right? So there's quite a bit of, if you think about 20 to 25 k's, there's quite a bit of energy in that when it's interacting, probably with a bit of meteo wind, with the air around it. And then at 8 meters a second, that's like 30 to 35 kilometers an hour column of air going up. So on Sunday, when we first took off about 11:30, it was kind of in that 2 category. It's really nice flying. So I took off, went over to Craigieburn, over to Cheeseman rather, was going down a bit there, came back, headed up Long Spur again, and got to 5 meters a second there. right? So in about the space of about half an hour, it picked up from 2 to 3 up to 5 metres a second. So my view on wing margin, I've got skill margin, I've got some, and I've probably still got most of my wing margin there. But at 4 to 5 metres a second, I've probably only got a bit of my wing margin left. And at 8 metres a second, I've got no margin at all left on either of those things. Doesn't necessarily mean at 8 metres a second I'd fall out of the sky and die. But what I do think is that if I'm at 2 to 3 metres a second, I know I'm going to make mistakes. I know there's road waves happening, and I know there's a strong possibility the conditions will worsen. So if I'm in 2 to 3 metres a second, I know that I'm going to probably, hopefully only momentarily, experience 4 to 5 metres a second conditions, effective conditions where the energy is equivalent to what I'd experience at 4 to 5 metres a second, right? So I'm, and targeting this, I'm hoping that I can cope with this for a bit, because I've still possibly got a little bit of wing margin left. I haven't got any skill margin, but I'm starting to rely on my wing. If I say, well, I've got, I got into that 5.4 metres a second. I was fine. It was really smooth. I stayed in the core until I decided that I was too strong, and I went outside. So, I feel like I kind of wasn't completely being stupid. So I could have kept flying there, and people did. So, but if I kept flying, I'm in the same situation. I'm in a 4 to 5 metres a second energy condition, and I know there's a strong chance I'll make mistakes, that there'll be road waves, and that conditions could worsen. So at that stage, there's nothing left for me if things get worse. Right? I have no margins left. So that's why I made the decision to go and land, because I'd thought about this before. I'd set my limits. I'd thought about wanting to keep my margins, and I flew out of the thermal. I took some time, thought about it, and thought, the day's getting worse. I'm going to go and land. So I'm not telling anybody to do that, right? Everybody else kept flying, and they had a great day and had a good time, and I think kudos to them. They had their own things to do. This was my lane. These are the decisions I've made. These were, I've got all these other influences that I'm dealing with. That's the route that I went. And I think the message I'm trying to give you is, doesn't matter where you set your limits and where you do your margins, as long as you do it and as long as you stick to it. Okay? Because you are going to make mistakes, you are going to come across road waves, and conditions, often do get worse. So, as I said, the most important thing is to set yourself some limits and to figure out what margins you're leaving when you do that. If you don't do it, you're basically just making it on the fly, and we know that's not good. The evidence is everywhere that when we make it up on the fly, we don't do it well. And as I say, between 1 in 15 and 1 in 30 of us is hitting the ground and getting hospitalised. So, ideally we do it better. So that was my story. So just being aware, with awareness, care for your fallibility, not just accept, but be convinced that you're going to make mistakes, because really you are. Develop techniques to navigate it, build your margins. Every time you get the opportunity to build a margin in, take it, and look after each other. Thank you.